So we're going to go in about a minute. And we're 10 seconds out.
Okay.
Good morning or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Welcome to the first panel on the sports block. This one is called Live Sports Streaming. Are we there yet? I don't think I have to tell anyone in attendance that sports content and sports streaming rights are a big topic in the traditional linear and streaming connected TV space. There's certainly a lot of money floating around and a lot of content floating around, and no shortage of sports-centric streaming services and products on the market today. We're joined today by three executives who are head first into the deep end of the sports streaming landscape. Joining me right now is Mike Levy. He's the Vice President of Global Rights Acquisition at Flow Sports. So they've been around for quite a while. And also John Leering, the CEO of WTA Media at DAZN. We'll also be joined a little bit later by John Lasker, who's the Vice President of Programming and Acquisitions at for digital media at ESPN. He'll be joining the panel in just a little bit. So, John, I'd like to start with you. DAZN and the Women's Tennis Association have this partnership for a joint venture that you're involved in. Prior to the joint venture, I think DAZN was producing something like 700 live sporting events per year, and now that's grown to over 2,500 sporting events over the same time period. Can you talk a little bit about the logistical challenges and the technical challenges with producing that volume of live sports for a streaming product?
Yeah, I'll talk about the WTA, and then we can get into other things if you want to. But when we started our partnership with the WTA and we looked at the landscape, we didn't really have a choice but to move from 700 matches to almost 4,000 matches. There was no other league that we saw on the landscape that was leaving, 70% of its content unproduced. So it was really a no-brainer for us to do so. But to your point, the scale of doing this operation with the WTA is pretty immense, right? It's 54 events over 32 weeks. Each one of those events requires anywhere between 9 and 12 days of boots on the ground between setup and production. Each one of those days is, averaging 10 hours a day of live programming. We're also doing it across 34 countries. So all of the elements with working in those countries are brought to bear, especially since COVID. So it's pretty large. And then I think part of the solution really speaks to what we all want to talk about today, which is, when we first started, most of our broadcast partners could only really find the shelf space for about 700 matches, meaning that we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 matches that were potentially being warehoused. Nobody wanted that. So we've really tried to expand and make sure that we're working with broadcasters who have an OTT footprint so that they can air as many of our matches as possible. It becomes a distribution challenge at that point. So overall, it's just this, this ever-evolving giant Rubik's Cube that we have to solve on a daily basis.
How do you tackle that giant Rubik's Cube on a daily basis? Like, obviously the logistical challenges of trying to program for linear are kind of obvious, right? There's only so much bandwidth you can and programming you could fit onto a single linear channel or even a multiplex channel, right, like the ESPN brand of channels or the Fox brand of channels in a day. Clearly, this you can kind of account for that with a streaming service, and this will be a question for Mike as well. But operating a streaming services brings about its own kind of logistical challenges too. So can you dive a little bit more into those and how you're addressing that?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound like such a BS cliche, but we want to leave it up to our audience, right? Again, in the tennis world, we distribute about 800 world feed matches, meaning that we're always sort of defaulting to the most popular players on the tour. But like politics, all sports are local, right? Everybody wants to root for someone who talks like them, acts like them, waves the same flag as they do. And so we don't want to alienate that audience. So I think my goal, DAZN's goal, is to really get out of programming and just air it all and let the viewer make the choice that's best for them. And I think that's the difference between a streaming service and a traditional linear service, right? There's more democratization in a streaming service if you're able to get that content out and let the buyer, the subscriber choose for themselves.
And to that point, to shift things over to Mike, Flow Sports has been in this space for a while. I would think about 20 years, right? And you talk about the logistical challenges of producing 7,000 matches from a single sport. Flow Sports does tens of thousands of live events across a variety of sports. So, I would imagine that that Rubik's Cube is all the more bigger. So can you talk a little bit about how Flow Sports is meeting the needs of your subscribers across the variety of sports that you offer and some of the logistical challenges associated with that?
It's a great question. And to be honest, it's very, very hard and constantly changing. The needs of fans are changing. Technology is changing. Distribution outlets are changing. So the one thing that I think we've learned time and time again, and sometimes we reinvent ourselves by necessity every 6 months, is that you've got to be nimble. You've got to have a dedicated workforce that's willing to really put in the hours and be inventive and curious. In our case, we're in 20 plus sports. We've been around for 15 years, and the one constant is change. And while I agree with the notion of democratization, that's the ideal, and I think we'd love to strive for that. Economic factors sometimes make that impossible. Producing at scale and at 4K quality, thousands and thousands of matches, depending on bandwidth at a given venue, sometimes it's just frankly impossible. And so having the boots on the ground that are able to be nimble, to optimize internet solutions in real time, to pivot on number of cameras, wireless cameras at any given moment, and scale a production to the quality of the event and the scale of that event is something that Flow's, I think, become an expert in order to make every single event we do economically viable and ultimately satisfy not only the fans, which is a key thing, of course, we're a direct-to-consumer product, but making sure that our rights holder partners are also pleased and satisfied with the partnership. Because in our sports, certainly where we've excelled, keeping those rights partners happy and growing is our reason for existence.
Do you find Matthew, can I ask Mike a question real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
In that regard. Hey, Mike, do you find that your users, your viewers, the fans, are they, as long as you're delivering a quality product, do you think the bells and whistles are as important to them? Or are they just looking for an enjoyable experience watching the sport they want to watch?
I love that question. And yes, where Flow differs a little bit from DAZN, certainly on the tier one side, and ESPN. In many cases, if Flow's not delivering it, it's not delivered.
Right.
And anytime you ask a customer to pay, they want a certain quality of product, and we aim to deliver that and constantly grow our sports. Our reason for being is to grow sports, and you do that by constantly evolving it and getting it better each and every year, each and every outing, delivering a better experience. But John, essentially, yes, there are some sports out there where if you do a really high quality one camera shoot and you've got a great announcer, fans are tickled. It's the best they've ever received.
Yeah.
And while we don't want to stop there, certainly, if you're really good at that, fans are happy to pay a premium price and to keep coming back and telling their friends about it.
Great.
I really love that question because I kind of had the same idea in mind as I was hearing Mike describe it, which is if you're catering to fans of a sport that may not be covered on a linear or even a major streaming channel or service, they're probably more willing to accept maybe not 4K quality, maybe just high definition or enhanced standard definition, as long as they get access to the sport they want to watch. It's almost like it's better to just have it delivered in some capacity, but still really well thought out, than to not have access to it at all. To that point, one of the complexities that streaming brings to the sports broadcast landscape is this idea of latency. And it's certainly not the only challenge, but with sports being such a social event, right? It's something that you can hop on Twitter for however long that continues to exist, or Facebook or Mastodon or whatever takes its place or comes next. And people are constantly talking about sports that are airing, all kinds of sports that are airing, but they may be watching it at different times, even though it's live, because of this issue of latency. I think certainly Amazon has tried to tackle this, and Comcast as well with Peacock for some of the higher tier sports that they offer. So are we at the point now where latency is not that big of a deal, where a couple of seconds here or there is not a huge issue? Or is there still a latency gap that needs to be closed? And how do we go about tackling that? And this is for anyone that wants to jump in and answer.
Mike, you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Sure. I can share, you mentioned that Flow does tens of thousands of events, and we have a lot of partners. This is not a conversation we spend a lot of time talking about. Mm-hmm. I think it's relevant in gambling, and particularly real-time gambling, where that might be relevant at the tier 1A level of sport. But for the most part, a few seconds here or there, and technology is enabling us to close that gap every day. This is not an area of concern. In the live streaming world, where the technology is still imperfect, far bigger priority is a clean stream, to not get disconnected, to get the camera angles that you want. Latency is not something that gives us much, is keeping us up at night, certainly. Although over time, as we continue to evolve, that will get into the top 4 or 5 topics of conversation, but it's simply not there today.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's right. I think the open internet was never devised to deliver low latency at scale, right? So everybody's kind of left to their own devices, no pun intended. I'll dovetail away from Mike just a bit by saying that there are some sports where it's no longer acceptable for you to see it 10 or 15 seconds after you get an alert on your phone. And so I think for all of us, we're trying to figure out how to make that latency streamlined, right? Whether it's your encoder or your packager or your CDN or your video player, you're trying to reduce that as much as possible. I heard something once that I've sort of turned into a mantra, and it's that you can have the greatest product agnostic of industry, but if you don't have a distribution plan that takes advantage of that product, you're screwed. And I've kind of moved a couple of those words around to now make it work for me in the OTT space. And that's, you can buy up all the great sports rights in the world. You can have the EPL, you can have the IPL, you can have the NFL, you can have all the L's there are. But if you don't have a video player, if you don't have an experience to share or give to your subscriber audience that allows them to really eat that product up on your player, game over. And I think it's why, for me, for DAZN, I'm sure for Mike and everybody else in this industry, your tech is as valuable to you as your content.
We could spend a lot of time talking about the underlying tech stack that powers the different streaming services. But I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about sports content acquisition and rights. That was something that Mike touched on a little bit earlier, and certainly I think that's very ingrained in Flow Sports as the DNA of the brand, as it is in the business strategies of everybody in the space. But John, I want to start with you because DAZN has been grabbing headlines over the last couple of years for grabbing very lucrative sports rights, especially in international markets, away from linear television and traditional broadcasters. So, how are consumers in those markets who may not be necessarily adept to streaming television content? It's still kind of a novel and new idea for them. How are they responding to this grab of sports content for a streaming service? Are they responding positively? Is there a little bit of a learning curve in getting them onboarded onto a streaming experience?
It's a great question. Look, we have these conversations all the time at DAZN, and I'm sure these same conversations happen with everybody who's in the space. I think my thoughts are, how do I say this? The sports fan is the most passionate, faithful, crazy human being on the planet. And whether you're DAZN or whether you're Amazon or whether you're Netflix or whether you're ESPN Plus or whether you're Flow Sports or anybody in this space, I think you've got to trust the fan. And I know that's a bullshit statement. I know it's cliche, but I really do believe it. I do believe that if you have the content and if you provide them with a fantastic viewing and interactive experience, they're going to find you agnostic of platform. It's 2023. And I just don't buy into the myth that the sports fan can't, won't, doesn't navigate from tech to tech depending on what she or he wants to watch. I don't know anybody like that in my life anymore. And I know that we're talking about millions of dollars of rights here when we buy up millions of dollars of rights. And we want to make sure that we get as many fans coming to us as possible to watch those rights. But I just don't think there's much difference anymore in anybody's eyes between traditional and streaming. That might be a cop-out, but that's really an honest answer.
I think that the consumers, at least in the domestic market, are starting to get a little of heartburn having to subscribe to a bunch of different streaming services, whereas, historically they were able to get a lot of top-tier sports programming on broadcast, and then kind of settled for the idea that, okay, they'll have to pay for a cable package to get ESPN and Fox Sports and for a little while NBC Sports. Now it's I wrote an article for Fierce Video a couple of months ago where I was speaking with analysts in the space that said, yeah, the sports rights landscape is becoming extremely fractured. And suddenly, it's not as simple as flipping the dial. Now you have to launch different streaming services, and depending on which platform you use, the service might not be supported by it because of rights or development issues or what have you. So, and this is going to be a problem over the long term because these sports rights are locked in for multiple years. So if you want to watch your favorite NFL team, Maybe you can get it on Peacock. You might have to put an antenna up for Fox. You might have to get NFL Plus for Monday Night Football, or ESPN Plus if it's simulcast on there. It's just the sports is kind of all over the place. So while they may not necessarily be, averse to signing up for a streaming service and getting it that way, I think there is a little bit of heartburn in having to suddenly sign up for not just one streaming service, but multiple streaming services. Remember your login, remember how much you're paying for all of these services, and then try to figure out where the sport event you want to watch for that particular day. And I'm talking more about the top sports franchises in this country, right? With the football and baseball and soccer not so much because of the Apple rights, but NBA and NASCAR. So I don't know how we tackle that or how we address that. There's probably a question in there somewhere.
So on the flip side, however, there's never been a better time in the history of humanity to be a sports fan, because there is unlimited content to watch. And yeah, there might be an extra click or two on a device in order to seek it out. But every single game of interest, literally every single game of interest, is available somewhere. And so there might be a slightly more intense user experience in order to get there. And even when the NFL, I'm a big NFL fan, and there are more distribution places than ever. And yet I live in Chicago. I'm an Atlanta Falcons fan. I can watch every single Atlanta Falcons game without any issue. And that'll be the way of the world for the rest of time. If I'm a motorsports fan in America, I know that for NASCAR, there's NBC, there's Fox, and there's Flow Racing. And so if you're a rugby fan in the United States, it's actually consolidated more than it's ever been, in the sense that there's a marketing partner in Flow Rugby that is out there spending money to promote the game, creating content to educate American fans on the sport. And hopefully in that sense, it's growing. So yes, there are more options. And yes, the wallet might be picked at a little bit more. But I'd argue also that in society today, people are honing in on what they want more than ever. There's no more of this just generalist, I like everything. Social media and algorithms are bringing people more and more into those things that they're passionate about. And if you're passionate about something, you seek it out and you find it. Audiences might be smaller in scale going forward because of all the choice. But locating your favorite thing is probably simpler than ever.
I think that's right. And Matthew, not to get too far off the track, but man, you think it's hard, right? You think it's hard for a sports fan right now. How about being a parent, right? With all of the streaming devices out there or platforms, and kids who want to bounce from one to another, depending on what the hot show of the moment is. I think that's where the wallet gets tighter than ever, maybe more so than sports. Certainly, I think most of us go through that pain at some point or another. So if we can navigate that, sports should be relatively easy.
Oh yeah,
what I can confidently say doesn't work in today's world is trying to distribute premium live sports content for free. That's an economy that doesn't work anymore. And so, when you think about the subscription model and the ask for revenue, it will get to a place where you see it or you don't, I think, because the free model is no longer sufficient in today's landscape if you want a premium product.
When you're talking about the free model, are you talking about broadcast?
No, digitally free.
What services are offering sports for free? Are we talking fast channels or YouTube or
all of the above? And we, I think the fast channel business is really, really interesting. But there isn't enough ad revenue there to support premium live sports consistently. there still needs to be a revenue model on a subscription side in order to grow that pie.
Yeah, I think some of your colleagues in the industry would agree with you on that. Earlier this week we heard from I think Scott Tomsic said something about that over at Fox, where he said, "Look, we own Tubi, but Tubi is not, which is a free ad-supported streaming product, but Tubi is not the right business model for live sports." And it's been kind of interesting to see what they do with their FAST product, which is, we've got the World Cup going on right now, and they are offering full match replays on Tubi in 4K, which costs a premium if you want to watch it live on some platforms like YouTube TV. And yet it seems to be working a bit better for them than just offering, a telecast of an NFL game over Tubi. And so what I'm hearing from you, and John, feel free to jump in on this too, is that the free ad-supported model doesn't, at least currently, mesh well with live sports. Would we ever get to a point where live sports could be offered on a free platform? And what would that look like if that's the case?
There are always opportunities to test and then invest, right? The way Flow views the world, and it might not be sensical for some, we would like to pay rights holders as much as we possibly can. The reason being is that it is our opinion in the sports that we're trying to grow, if rights holders are in a position where they can reinvest in their product, reinvest and put a better product on the field, expansion, whatever the case might be, and allow us to complement them on marketing and context building and high quality production, sport grows. To do it by yourself or to do it for free and to give up the revenue that enables you to understand how to invest, right? If you've got a guaranteed rights fee, you can plan your business. If it's an ad-supported model where you're having to reinvent it every year, it's difficult to plan and it's difficult to invest in your business. And so we try really hard with our rights holder partners to understand where they have needs and to build a program that enables them to grow. And when we do that, usually there's mutual benefit, growth, and success and renewals and long-term partnership.
I got nothing to add. That was perfect. I think that's spot on.
Well, good. I'll ask a question that, John, you might be able to offer some insight on, which is, how do we educate consumers that live sports or sports programming in general is incredibly expensive to produce? It's probably some of the most expensive content, not just to produce, but also to distribute on the market today, far exceeding sometimes the budget of theatrical films. When consumers see that, Flow Sports is charging what, $20 plus a month, or, $100 or so a year for access to sports on the platform, and DAZN is coming in maybe a little bit under that price, and ESPN is coming in a little bit under that price. It's not for nothing, right? It's not because you're trying to get rich off of this product. Of course, everybody's trying to make a profit, but it's also because sports is just super, super expensive to produce and distribute to consumers. So how do we educate consumers so that they don't see sports rights holders and sports distributors as
greedy?
Well, yeah, for lack of a better term, because that term does get thrown out a lot, especially during carriage disputes, right, with broadcasters and with cable networks. And we're not seeing that as much in sports because it's an opt-in. But how do we educate consumers that just sports is really expensive to produce? I know you are getting a good value if you're paying between $10 and $25 a month for a sports-related streaming product.
Yeah, it's the chicken and the egg, right? It's that I don't know if you can. I mean, look, you can put out the greatest sort of tutorial there is. I just don't think they care. I mean, I think they want their sport as inexpensively as they can get it, and to them, if it costs them, I'm making it up, if it costs them $14 a month and they can't afford that $14 a month, and you try to tell them that we're giving you the best product possible because we've got 14 cameras out there, they're going to say, take away 3 cameras and give it to me cheaper, right? I don't think you can logically argue this with a sports fan. And I don't mean to belittle sports fans. I'm one of them. I think that I think your goal is to always assess what the landscape is sort of showing you, and reassessing what it is that you're going to charge your subscribers, your fans, to stick with you. I know that sounds like a cop-out, and I don't mean it to be, but we have these conversations all the time, and I don't know what the answer is to give to that fan that she or he will accept. I don't.
I don't think it's a healthy conversation. I don't know if I'm off script with what my communications people would say, but you can't win that one, no. Right? Anybody goes into a car dealership, how'd you come up with the price of that car? Well, parts and whatever, and we got to make a profit, and I need it lower, right? And so that conversation never would end. I think in our world, we're successful when we become the essential destination for whatever sport we're covering. You're the essential destination for WTA. ESPN has become the essential destination for college football and other things, right? When we become the essential destination of grassroots racing in America, motorsports, where fans are happy to give us $150 a year because they feel the value. They're coming to us every day, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, and it's becoming utility in their life that without it, they would be uncomfortable. Yep. And when you get to that place with any consumer in any business, I believe there's elasticity in their willingness to spend. And so we look at the world as we are a premium product without question. We know that that's a responsibility, right? And so we strive to provide as much value as we can, not just in the live distribution of sport, but through films and storytelling and articles and journalism and context building, statistics and data, so that when that fan arrives on Flow, however they choose to reach us, they feel as if they got not only a satisfactory experience, but one in which they're grateful that they were there. When you've accomplished that, the price objections tend to slip away.
Sure. So it's proof of performance is what I'm getting from these answers. It's not so much I need to educate the consumer. It's this, once they're in, give them the best possible product and experience so that they stay. And it's in Mike's case, and probably with DAZN as well, it's not just with live sports, it's live sports plus. And right, we're seeing ESPN do that too with a lot of their storytelling and their journalism. So it's proof of performance based, right?
And the beauty of digital versus television is that everything is measurable in real time. So when you get good at it, you can eliminate waste, right? You don't need to do a 20 episode commitment on a series. You can do a particular interview or short film or whatever, and you get instant feedback on whether fans appreciated it or not. And if they don't, you throw it away and you reinvest into something else. And I think that that's something that Flow's become quite savvy at in our 15 years, not quite 20. In our 15 years is we continue to experiment and try to create value beyond the live, to give that, for lack of a better word, surprise and delight when somebody interacts with our content. They're getting more than they hoped, more than just the live game. But we got to deliver that live game really well, because that's ultimately why they initially signed up.
Sure. And John, are you seeing the same thing at DAZN?
Yeah, I think our original content department is always looking at new and different ways to feed the audience's passion and sort of continue to get them to engage in the platform when their favorite sport is not actually being played. It's really interesting to me. I initially thought that that we had to keep a 24/7, 365 live product going with live sports. I've been completely proven wrong over the last year. Our original content department is so good and has captured so much attention from our subscribers, regardless of sport, that it really is, it is as valuable to us in some ways as our live content.
Are you seeing a return on the investment in terms of creating the original content? Is it not just a value add, but it's actually a lucrative part of the business?
I think it depends on what your definition of lucrative is. I think it is added value. I also think that when you hit it right and you get the right piece of content, it's its own driver. So that's what our content team is always searching for, is that next piece that allows them to stand on their own without needing the support of a live game, right? And it's why we're always looking for the most skilled storytellers we can find.
And Mike, I'll pose the same question to you in terms of original content. Are you finding that it's more than just a value add, but that it's really resonating with consumers and a good part of the business?
I think it varies depending on where we are within our programming. In areas where we have really robust live content, Flow Racing, for example, where we have over 3,000 live events a year, what the content really does is create context. And so it serves as a very complementary role to the live, where we're pushing that out on social, we're doing podcasts and so forth. And in that case, we probably behave a little bit more like ESPN, where the content is informing fans on the storylines that they need to watch and get them pumped up for the evening. Yes, there's some revenue driving going on there for sure from support advertising and so forth, which is part of our business. But it's really for the storytelling and context building. In other areas, depending on the programming in a sport, maybe rugby where you don't play every day, we need to depend on content to not only build context, but be a source of revenue and engagement for that fan base to keep coming back. Again, to be the essential destination, you need that fan to try and check you out daily and to have new and original content with which to engage with on a daily basis, so that you can become part of the habit of a fan to engage with your platform on a daily basis. That really helps with subscription retention as well. So we do a pretty good job of measuring everything and tying it back to either sub revenue or independent advertising revenue, retention revenue. Everything should have purpose. And in that case, content certainly serves multiple purposes.
With the last few minutes that we have a couple of people in our session, that in our audience, that are focused on the sales and marketing aspect of it. And this wasn't a question that came up in prep, but as a couple of questions during this session haven't come up in prep, but it occurs to me that there may be some opportunities to do some advertising and marketing, some more brand promotion, both in linear live content as well as in some of this on-demand programming with third parties. And perhaps that might, for the consumer, get the cost of a subscription down a little bit. Are either one of you exploring, or have you already done any kind of brand partnerships or advertising to help open up additional revenue channels, or help bring the cost of the subscription down for the consumer, or a little bit of both? And what does that kind of look like?
Go ahead, Mike. I'll answer after you.
It's a theme developing there, John. I think in our part, we feel pretty confident with our value proposition. I've been with Flow for 8 years. We've never raised price. We like our price point, and it's enabled us to reinvest in our rights partners, in our technology platform, as John alluded to earlier, and we think we're sitting at the right place. That said, we also feel that we're in a very complementary position. It's not, other than ESPN and DAZN, there are very few kind of multi-sport bundles out there from an OTT perspective. We're not necessarily on the Flow side competing with Fox and NBC on tier 1 rights. So where we live, we believe we can be highly complementary. So while we haven't necessarily done a very specific partnership as you described it, we're constantly talking to other players in the space on how we can work together. We've got a really interesting track record. I was talking to NASCAR about this last week, where when we get in the tier 2 and tier 3 levels of a sport, whether it's the NASCAR grassroots program, or whether it's with Big East women's basketball or the Professional Bowlers Association, when we had a partnership with the Big Ten Network, whenever their tier 2 and tier 3 rights have sat with Flow, in almost every case, the tier 1 linear ratings went up. I don't know if that's a coincidence. We're going to put our data people on it and see if there's something there. But I know we're telling stories 24/7, 365, building up our own content, the athletes, the teams, the coaches, the leagues. And if the hypothesis holds true that a partner like Flow can help elevate linear ratings, maybe that is something that we dig into and try to formalize deeper partnerships, because truth be told, many of these networks and leagues don't have the incremental marketing and content budgets to do it themselves. It's tight everywhere. So Moby, those are the types of partnerships where if folks are willing, I think Flow would be very interested in having those types of conversations. And if we can pass through savings to consumers, and that's viable, I think we'd be happy to look at that.
And John, before you jump in, Mike, can you just, for our audience and the people that are watching on YouTube that may not be familiar, what is the price point for Flow Sports? Like what does a subscription cost?
So typically we're $30 a month or $150 a year. That has been our standard pricing for nearly a decade. There's some nuance in there on particular partnerships in the NCAA space when we go international in Brazil, and we found some areas to test and do some nuance, but that has been our core pricing.
And then, John, we have about a minute and a half left, but if you wanted to add anything on the potential for brand partnerships and advertising to supplement the subscription streaming cost at DAZN, is that anything that you guys are looking at, or have you guys kind of done something in that space?
Absolutely. We are looking into it. I think, you never turn down a partnership until it doesn't work for, one or both of the partners. I think we're always looking at ways to reduce costs, make the service, continue to make the service affordable, especially since we're a global product. So I don't think we never say no at the start of any conversation, whether it's partnership or advertising or whatever it might be. So, I mean, it's that simple.
Excellent. Well, this has been a terrific panel, and this 45 minutes really flew by. For our audience members, we have a networking opportunity that will take place over the next 15 minutes. And then we're going to jump right into a new panel on fan engagement in sports. That'll be moderated by Juan Conti, the director of events for the brand that's putting on this virtual event. Thank you so much, John and Mike, for lending your experience and insight during this panel. We'll see everybody in just a couple of minutes.